Okay, guys, I just had like a brain blow or whatever. Just like it. So this morning, I was having worship and I was listening to a podcast. And the podcast is by Why They Did It. Why They Did That. It's a really good podcast. It's got educated like professors and biblical professors and everything, and they chime in on like why Bible characters did something, like what led up to it, and like it's difficult to tell you, but it's really I find it very interesting. I like this kind of stuff. Today they were talking. Well, I was listening today. It's been the podcast was done probably a year or two ago. It's an older one, but they were talking, and they were talking about Moses. And of course, I know the story. It's my guess that most of us know the story of Moses. And Moses, he was born and then was taken away. Well, no, he was born and then he was put in the river, in a floating boat in the river, just to keep him safe. And then the princess or the queen or something found him, and she claimed him as her own. So Moses became royalty. So he gets his whole childhood and everything. He's raised very high on the high up. He's high society. And so it keeps going, and then it goes on to Moses. I don't know how old he was, but somebody was hurting. I think he was hurting a slave or something like that. One of the Israelites. I think it was that. Could be wrong. And so Moses kind of flipped out, and Moses ended up killing this Egyptian. And yeah, I think many of us have heard this. Many of us know this story. Well, if you fast forward along like Moses' entire life, he goes into the desert or whatever, runs away, spends 40 years out there, then comes back and marches the Israelites out of Egypt and onto the Canaan land. Moses never makes it to the Canaan land. But he did go up on, I think it was Mount Sinai or Mount Ararat or one of those mountains. And this is the mountain that God spoke to the Israelites, and I think that he gave them the 10 Commandments there. And so Moses, I'm not 100% sure I know the story, but I am having a difficult time remembering all the details. So, one way or the other, Moses climbs up to the top of the mountain and dies. And then Christ comes down and takes him home, takes him to heaven. So Moses is one of the few that have made it to heaven. Did you hear the beginning of the story? Moses is a murderer. Moses is a murderer that's right next to Christ right now. Wow. So, yeah, that just totally blew my, like, of course, you always hear, oh, well, God will forgive every sin, and, well, he'll forgive all of them, but there are those ones that really wouldn't make it. Hitler probably won't make it. But Moses walked, well, he didn't walk into heaven, but he was taken to heaven. After he died, yes. But Moses is in heaven alive. And he's a murderer. Wow. I'm sure that things happened since he flipped. And also, something else, I had never thought about it. Of course, I knew a little, like, Moses, he was out in the wilderness, and God's like, hey, you gotta go save the Israelites. And he's like, no, I can't speak. I can't speak. He's an Israelite, or not, he's an Egyptian, and he couldn't speak. He had stuttering problems, is my guess, or something along those lines. And he's like, he spent 40 years out in the desert, out in the wilderness. So, and I don't know, but I'm guessing, I'm assuming he was 20 years old or so before he killed the Egyptian. 25. So he was at least 60 years before he came back to take the Israelites home. 6 years old, and he's stuttering. So this is not just a week-long thing. This has been his entire life. Because he's like, God, I can't talk. I can't talk. And God's like, dude, who made you? Think about it. Who? Come on. But Moses is like, no, I can't talk. Guess so. It's my guess he'd grown up with this inability to speak. Of course, he could talk. Okay, I can't say that. I would assume he could talk, but he had a stuttering problem, or like he told God, he's like, I can't go to the Pharaoh and say, let my people go. So Moses is a murderer that can't speak. So, like, I think he could speak, but he just couldn't. I don't know. That just really interesting. Have you ever thought about that? Moses is a murderer standing by God right now. And then he's complaining to God that I can't speak. But God's like, I made you. What's your problem? So, yeah. That just like spoke to me today. It's like, I got nothing. Yeah, I'm disabled. But am I really? Maybe God's using this to humble me and maybe to bring others to Christ. I don't know. Probably more so to humble me, because I can use a little bit of humbling. So yeah, that was just something very interesting that I thought about it. I was like, okey doke. So, yeah.